Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster base plate on a 2024 Jeep Grand Cherokee L. Now there's 5 main components that are always going to be required when flat towing a vehicle. And the first one we'll start on the vehicle side is going to be the base plate, and that structurally attaches to the frame of the vehicle, creating a mounting point for the rest of your components. And that connection point between the two of the towed vehicle and RV is going to be your tow bar. So that attaches to your base plate and then to the hitch on the RV. Now along with that, just like you'd be pulling a trailer, you have your safety cables in case of an accidental disconnect. Your base plate will have that mounting point, and then you'll just use the trailer hitch safety chain loops there. We also have a supplemental braking system, and that way you can slow and stop the vehicle when you apply the brakes on the RV. And all of those braking systems have a breakaway switch, and that's in case of a catastrophic disconnect. This cable will pull, applying the brakes on the vehicle so it's not rolling down the road. We also have our diode wiring. You can see our umbilical goes from our 7-pole to the 6-pole on the front of the vehicle, and that's going to give us our running lights, turn signals, and brake lights. You can also add in a charge line to that to trickle charge your battery while going down the road. Now this is what your base plate is going to look like when it's installed on your Jeep, and Roadmaster did a really good job of getting the base plate into a nice spot where you have all of your accessible parts as far as your tow hooks for your safety chain loops, as well as your removable arm receptacles, and also a breakaway switch that puts it right in this grill. And that way all you have to do is pop that grill out. You might need to do a little bit of trimming, but it really keeps this looking clean. And even the 6-pole bracket is in this lower grill and pops out in a really nice spot. So even though you have quite a bit going on here, we are able to retain the license plate and our tow hooks, and it looks really good in the process. Now, it does have a nice clean look when normally driving, but even when you're ready to flat tow, it's super easy to get it prepped. You'll just have your removable arms, and you'll slide these in, and just with a quarter turn, those are going to snap into place. It's equally as easy to remove them by just pulling this pin, quarter turn, and then it pushes it out. So it makes it super easy to get this all prepped, and once you have these in place, you'll just pull up to your RV, and we'll hook up the components. Now we'll get our tow bar hooked up, and being that this is a Roadmaster base plate, you do want Roadmaster ends on your tow bar, and that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have a Roadmaster tow bar. You can generally get pretty much every brand with the Roadmaster ends, and these are specific to this mounting style. And generally when you get these arms or the attachments on your tow bar, they're going to come with the pins, which are also specific to Roadmaster, so just make sure that you're getting that combo. You'll then take your linch pin, get that snapped into place. And just like towing a trailer, you're going to have safety cables. And I do like that these are just sticking out far enough to be able to hook up nice and easy, but it doesn't really take away from the look of the vehicle. So again, another nice job of designing this base plate by Roadmaster. Now when it comes to the installation of this base plate, just like most base plates on flat-toed vehicles, your front fascia is going to come off so you can get everything mounted up. That's a great time to get all of your components knocked out. It makes it a lot easier to run all your wires and make it nice and clean. This system, because it is designed so well to fit in that grill, tolerances are a little bit tight, so you do need to do a little bit of adjustment and just be really diligent on making sure that you get it all aligned properly. But overall, none of it's terribly hard to do. There is quite a bit of trimming of air dams and just a little bit of frame trimming, which seems a little bit daunting, but overall none of it's terribly hard as long as you go step by step. So if you're mechanically inclined, you can definitely follow along on the video and get this knocked out. I would give yourself a solid day to do this, and you're probably going to want an extra set of hands to accomplish it. But if you decide maybe it's not for you, maybe you don't have the place to do it, the tools to do it, or even the want to do it, you can use eTrailer's dealer network locator to find someone close to you to get this installed. But if you are doing this yourself, follow along. I'll make sure you get your base plate installed. To get our base plate installed, it is going to require taking off the front fascia. And something I'll preface is if you're doing the rest of your flat tow components, I highly recommend doing it at the same time as your base plate, because as it mounts up on the front, you're going to have that fascia off to be able to route your wires nice and clean. Something else that I'll point out is there's going to be quite a bit of hardware that we're going to be pulling off as we take the fascia off. So have a nice organized spot to keep all of it. That way reinstallation becomes that much easier. First step we're going to do is remove this plastic panel up top. It's just going to be a series of plastic push pins. Something that's handy that I really like is a trim panel tool. We have these here at eTrailer, and I use these all the time at home. They're really nice for things just like these plastic push pins, where you can just wedge in the side, pry that up a little bit, and once you get that center section pulled out, you should be able to get the bottom as well. If it does separate, just make sure you have both pieces put back together when you store them. You can also use a flathead screwdriver, and it's going to accomplish the same thing. So just go throughout this plastic panel. You'll see all the plastic push pins. We'll just get these removed until we can get our panel off. With those push pins removed, we can take our panel and set this aside. The panel removed, that's going to give us access to a 10mm bolt here on the side, just kind of by this hood stop. We'll have one on the other side as well, so we'll get those taken out. There's also going to be 6 T40 Torx bit headed bolts that we're going to want to remove. So just work along the front portion of the grill and we'll get those taken out as well. Now we're going to head underneath the fascia and we're going to find a bunch of 10mm bolts. So as we go along the front, we'll take all these down, and our goal is to get this underbody panel to hang down. So as you go along, there's going to be a few more 10mm that you're going to have to get. There's also, right by the oil change access door, this 13mm is frame mounted, so we're going to have to take that off, and then there's also going to be some 8mm on the outside. So the main goal, get all of this hardware down so we can drape down our underbody panel. We're also going to need to get our wheel well liner separated from the fascia, and it's just going to be a series of 8mm screws. Now, it can get a little bit tricky, and if you don't have an electric ratchet to get in there, no worries. What you can do is hop in the vehicle, put the vehicle in accessory mode, and then turn the wheel over to gain access to them. We're just going to work all the way to the inside portion and get all the 8mm taken off. There's also going to be 2 plastic 10mm nuts that we're going to attack as well. Those plastic nuts, one of them is going to be located up at the top here in this pocket, and the other one's going to be tucked on the inside wheel well liner wall. So we'll get those taken out, and then we'll just repeat on the other side of the vehicle. On the passenger side of the vehicle, if you just peel back that fender liner, you're going to find this plug located right here, and that's going to run to our fascia. So we're going to want to separate that so we don't have electrical connections attached. And to get this undone, on the bottom, you won't be able to see it right now, but there's going to be a locking tab. We're going to pull that back, and then we should be able to press down and get this separated. So this little gray portion, if you can see that, you can use your fingernail or a flathead screwdriver to kind of separate that, and then push down on that tab portion. So here you can see that locking tab. Just peel that back, and then if you press down on that, you'll be able to separate that. On the driver's side, we're going to have the similar clip. So your vehicle may have extra, if you have a front windshield washer squirter for the front camera, you're also going to need to unplug from that washer line. Just make sure you have something to cap that up. I always use a set of vice grips. You can just crimp down on that. That way you're not losing all of your washer fluid. Now this trim that goes along the wheel well, we're going to want to peel this back to gain access to remove the fascia still. It's a series of clips, and it's going to be hard for you to see. Once I get it popped off, I'll show you exactly how to get it off, but there's going to be 2 different styles of clips, and I'm going to use a socket to make this a little bit easier, and once I pop this out, I'll show you why. So with this popped out, it is kind of hard to get to the black and green clips that you see here, but I found that if you just keep pressure and pop these white tabs out, you can kind of work this along and it should come off pretty easily. And the reason I use an 8mm socket is to get these to crimp down. You can just slide the socket on there and that's going to bring those tabs in rather than trying to do it with your hands. And it makes it a lot easier to just push on and be able to pull this out. And as you pop this out, you'll see where the fascia meets the front fender. You're just going to want to go 1 clip up from that. And we do want to give us a little bit of clearance here. So I'm going to just roll up a rag and put this in place to kind of keep this separated. Now, located in the fender area, you're going to see this 10mm bolt that's attaching the fascia to the front fender. We'll go ahead and get that taken out. Now, you might also notice that I use some painter's tape to just tape along the seams of the fender, the front fascia, and then also on the clips on our wheel well trim that we have here. And that's just to kind of protect, any friction or rubbing from causing damage to the clear coat. It's a nice, easy way to make sure you're not damaging your vehicle in the process of getting this all installed. So we'll repeat all the same steps on the other side, and we're going to get ready to get our fascia taken off. Now, removing the fascia isn't terribly hard to do, but you are going to want an extra set of hands. These fascias are fairly heavy and also just kind of cumbersome with one person to be able to get it snapped off. But the main thing that we're going to be doing is pulling on these corners to get these clips to pop out. And as we work our way towards the center, the fascia should slide off fairly easily. But you're going to want a nice, safe place to put your fascia while you're putting your base plate and all your components on so it doesn't get scratched. So set something up, and then with an extra set of hands, we can get our fascia removed. Those side clips, if you just put a little bit of pressure on the fascia, you should be able to get this to pop out. It's a little tight at this first clip, but once you kind of move along from that, it's not too bad. So once you get that first one popped out, it's pretty tight just where that 10mm bolted up. So just get that separated, and the rest of the clips come out fairly easily. So with the extra set of hands on the other side, get that corner popped off as well, and then we'll just work our way to the front until we get this fascia taken off. Now, something to help you, once you kind of get to this point, or even before that, on the grill portion where we remove a 10mm bolt originally, you just lift up, and that's going to kind of let this draw forward, making it a lot easier. You'll then lift this up over the hood stops, and that way we can get the whole thing taken off. And as you're pulling it off, don't yank it back too fast. You want to make sure, if you do have any other connections, that you're getting those separated. Ours came off pretty easy. You may have to kind of pull on the bottom to get it to loosen up. But from here, we'll just set this aside. Head to each of your tow hooks, and you're going to have two 16mm bolts that are holding this in place. We're going to get those removed. There's also a small 10mm nut that's located in between. We're going to be reusing that later on, so hold on to that 10mm nut. So we'll get all these taken off on both sides. We're also going to get our bumper beam removed, and that's just going to have two 16mm bolts that run directly into the frame rail. You'll see this little notch here, so we'll take those out on both sides. And our bumper beam is not going to be going back in place. Our base plate's going to live here, so you can do whatever you want with it, but it will not be reinstalled. There is going to be a little bit of modification required to obviously get our base plate in a spot that it's going to fit, and a lot of that's going to come down to trimming our air dams that we have here, but we also have the stud that we removed that 10mm from, and we want that out of the way. So they say you can use a die grinder or cut-off wheel. If you don't have that or don't want to make any sparks or anything necessary, I found that what you can do is if you just take a set of channel locks or vice grips and just kind of wiggle this, it'll start to take down that tack on the back, and then with a hammer you can just knock this in. Our base plate is going to run across this section, so this lower air dam on both sides is going to need to be removed, and it's fairly easy to do that. We're going to have a plastic Christmas tree located on this tab here. We'll get that pried out. There's also one located down here, kind of by the bottom portion of our radiator. Just pop that out. And the plastic, it goes around this support beam. So what we're going to do is just cut this section to be able to remove this larger portion down below. So I'm just going to use a pair of just snips here. You can use really any cutting method that you have, because all we're trying to do is get this to separate. And that's what it should look like when you get that removed. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. Continuing on with some modification, we're going to be trimming this plastic portion as well as part of this frame rail not necessarily a rail, but this black metal here. And I've notched it out with some tape here just so you can kind of see where we're going to be cutting. And I'll be using an angle grinder. That's kind of my weapon of choice here, but really anything that cuts through. So if you have a Sawzall, but something that I found is, you have your tow hooks right here, and that's going to make for a tough time getting a clean cut. So to remove these is actually pretty easy. The nut on the back side generally isn't very tight, and what you can do is if you need to, you can just put a set of channel locks on there and then just twist this end until you get it to pull out. But this will make it a lot easier for us to trim. Now I've marked these out on both sides, and there are some good references that I'll show you where to tape. Now, depending if you have a hybrid or not, you will have a step of a pedestrian alert device, and that's just when you're driving around in a parking lot and you don't have that gasoline engine. That makes that alert to let people know, and that's going to be located. We actually still have the mounting points for it right here. So if you do have a pedestrian alert, just undo the hardware that holds that in place, and if you need to, you can zip tie that up. We are going to be cutting off the top mount. They say to retain this clip for that pedestrian alert system. We don't obviously have that, but you will want to pry that off. You can just take a flathead screwdriver on the back side, open that up, and it should come out fairly easily. But I mentioned that taping this out, if you follow along, you're going to be on the top portion of the bottom mounting point, but this runs right to the center of where we pulled those 16mm bolts out for our bumper beam. The same goes for the top, so if you just follow that over and then tape it a little bit, pretty much once it gets flat here around this curve is what we're looking for. And again, with those tow hooks out, this should be nice and easy to cut through. Now, before cutting, be careful because you do have your horns here. So if this sensor is hanging down a little bit low and you're unsure if you're going to make contact with that, you're better off to just unplug it and get it out of the way. You can remove the horn if you need to, but that might be a little excessive. I think this out of the way gives us that nice clean line to be able to cut. Now once cut out, you are going to probably have some metal burrs. If you want to sand those down or take a file to them, by all means. But something else that we're going to do, since this is raw exposed metal, we're going to put some black spray paint. You can use clear coat or really any paint that you may have handy. And we're just going to touch up all those edges, and that will help prevent any rust and corrosion long term. So I'll get this file down, and we'll get it painted, and then we're just going to repeat the same step on the other side. Now on this upper air dam, we're going to find an ambient air temperature sensor, and that just has a plastic Christmas tree. So pry that out, and then we'll just feed it through these slots. The reason being is we are going to be trimming this upper air dam on both sides, so I'll get that marked out, and we'll trim that out. Trimming this out, pretty easy. If you look, there's going to be this notch right here. It makes a 90-degree angle. If you just cut up, you can see where I put the tape. This whole section is going to come off, and we're going to repeat that same process on the other side. It's just plastic, so any cutting method that you have, go ahead and get this trimmed out. We're going to grab our side brackets for our base plate to begin that portion of the installation, and it is going to be side specific, so you need to make sure that you have this aligned properly, and the best way to do that is look for this teardrop shape. We're going to have that with the skinnier portion at the top here, so this will align where we remove that stud. This plate is going to go to the outside where we trimmed out, so it's also a good time to check any clearances of trimming. It should fit in here to where we can align those factory holes from the bumper beam, and we're going to use that factory hardware to just get this in place. It's going to become a template for us, so you don't have to get crazy as far as tightening down, but we do want it nice and secure. That way we get a perfectly centered reference mark to be able to drill out later. And what I'd recommend doing is it is slotted. Push this against the frame as far as you can before tightening it down. So I'm just going to snug it down. And then I'm going to get my other one in place as well. So with that bolted down, we're going to be using these outside plates to become our templates to drill through, and eventually we're going to be passing hardware through this spot, but we do need to get both sides drilled out. And I'd recommend, this is hardened steel a lot of times, so it can get a little bit tricky to go through. So maybe a pilot hole might help you here, and then we're going to eventually step it up to a 17/32. If you want to, you can have the bolts ready in our kit to just kind of pass through to make sure that it goes in nice and easy. But just take your time here and get these drilled out. With the teardrop shape, that's going to also create a template for us to use an 1.5" hole saw to be able to drill out a hole. And this will allow us to get our handle nuts in here. The passenger side is quite a bit more open. And I actually am just going to be using we got 1.25" here, so it's a little bit smaller. But as long as you can kind of get that passed through, you should be okay. Now, if you really want to enlarge it more, you can take this off and just grind out, just maybe mark that spot, but this should be plenty fine for us to get through here. Now also, if you don't have a hole saw and you don't want to have to go out and get something, you can also really just open this up. Again, just marking this out, and you can take this bracket out. As long as you cut a spot that's going to be open in that teardrop, that's the main thing we're looking for. If you had a pedestrian alert system, it does come with a bracket to reattach that to this lower portion. So if you need to, go ahead and reattach that. We don't have ours today, so we'll move along by putting our bolts through these holes here. And we're going to be using these whiz nuts to get those tightened in place. So first thing, as you drilled it all out, just grab the 1/2" bolts. There's some 7/16 in the kit as well. These are obviously going to be the slightly larger diameter, so make sure you're grabbing the proper hardware. They should thread into the whiz nut. And just test to make sure that it passes in nice and easy. And if you're good, you'll just put a split washer on here, and then we're also going to be putting some Loctite on our threads. And our goal is to pass this into here, and it's going to bolt into our plate. So this flat part, you can bend this rod to account for any angles you need to, but we'll feed this up and then get that started by hand. Now this can be a game of testing your patience, but what I recommend is get this bent to a spot where you can see the backing plate along where you drilled, and just get those threads kind of lined up perfectly, and then just lightly put the bolt in and try to get a few threads started. And once you get that started, we're going to be doing the same thing on the bottom hole and then also on the other side. So let's get those all in place. With those hand tightened in place, you can go ahead and get those snugged down with a 3/4" socket. You don't need to get too crazy because we're going to come back with a torque wrench. And in the instruction manual, they'll have a torque chart. So just refer to the hardware size, and then we'll get these all torqued down properly. And a torque wrench is going to be necessary in this install because you want to make sure it's obviously tight enough to be able to flat tow your vehicle down the road, but also you don't want to be over tight putting stress on any of the hardware. So this is a great way to make sure we have it right in line where we need it. Now, once torqued down, to get these handles out, you can just simply work these back and forth, and that small little tack will break off. Now, you don't have to do this, but if you want to, you can also just cut it off. It's really not going to cause any issue. Just make sure that these obviously aren't hanging out. Some other options too, if you put a set of pliers on here and just kind of twist it around, eventually it will pop off. So you can go ahead and get these all taken out. We can now take out the factory hardware that we use to hold our bracket in place. And we're going to throw some Loctite on here and then put them back in place and torque them down. Now, the great thing about this base plate in particular is that you retain the factory tow hooks. Not all base plates allow you to do that, but we do need to bolt that down to the new spot since we don't have that any longer, since it bolted up to that bumper beam. And so you might need an extra set of hands for this one, but we'll just thread this in place just to get it started. And you'll see this notch, that's going to go into the slot on our base plate bracket. So just get the threads started on the back side. Now you're going to want to grab two of your bolts, and ours were kind of pre-assembled already, so they'll just have two different washers of different diameters, a split washer, and then the nut on here. So what we're going to do first is we'll get some thread lock on here. And then we'll take our large flat washer, and this is going to feed through the new hole, and make sure you have it going on the tow hook. And we'll finish it up with the smaller flat washer, the split washer, and then the nut. And you can get this same combo in place down here. Now where you want an assistant is you want them to pull this back as you tighten it down, just to make sure that it's in place. So make sure you have slack here. It's not fully tightened back here, but we want this all the way against our hardware. So while pulling pressure towards the front as much as possible, make sure that you have all that slack pulled out to where it is just resting on those bolts. We're going to put a 5/8 box end on the head of the bolt. And again, you're going to want to keep that pressure. So if you have an extra set of hands, you can have them pull back while you tighten this down with the 11/16 on the nut. At this point, once you have it tightened down, we'll take our torque wrench and get this torqued down. Once you have both of those torqued properly, you can grab a pair of channel locks and just tighten down the bolt on the back side here until it's snug. With the remainder of our hardware, we're going to have our bolts and flat washers. We're going to get those all set up with thread lock on them, so get your flat washers passed on to those. And you might want an extra set of hands here, but we'll raise this up in place and get the holes aligned on each of the side brackets. And it might be a little bit tight here, so if that's the case, maybe a dead blow to kind of bump this into place. And you might have to give it just a little persuasion here, but once we get it passed through, we're going to get our bolts passed through the holes and then finish it up with a nut on the back side. So go ahead, get this knocked into place, and then we'll get our hardware put in. So with a little persuasion of the dead blow, if you get the first top ones in place on each side, it'll at least support it, and then you can kind of adjust from there. And then we'll just pass the bolt through and then hand tighten that down with the nut on the back side, and make sure you have 3 on each side. Before we tighten it down, we do want to check from the top of our side plate to the top of our center portion. We want 1/8 of an inch. So that's why it's important to make sure you don't have it snug down all the way. And we'll measure ours, and we're about close to 1/2 inch. So I am going to bump this up with our dead blow before tightening that down and double check the other side. Once we're happy with that 1/8 of an inch, we're going to be good to start snugging these down. If you're having trouble keeping it to that 1/8 of an inch, what you can do is put a floor jack underneath here and just raise that up to where it holds it. And then again, that's going to allow us to get everything snugged down. Now, once we snug this down, they recommend test fitting the fascia for fit. But this is a great time to get the rest of the components up, because structurally we're pretty close, and if we do need to adjust anything, it won't be that hard to do with the components on. So there's going to be a few more steps that we need to do to the fascia, but I'm going to get my components put on. We'll come back and then I'll show you how to get that all put back in place. Now I've got all of my components set up. You might notice that my diode wiring and charge line, I haven't put my plug on here, and that's because this will slide through the grill and then I'll attach it. So just a helpful tip there. Otherwise you will have to cut out a large spot or undo that, and hopefully you have extra wiring to kind of move that around. But if not, if you haven't done that step, I would leave it like this, just tape it on here to make it easier. We have our breakaway switch mounted up here. Before we test fit our fascia on, they did mention we may need to adjust this a little bit. We need to open up the grill portion to be able to slide on here. So let's head over to the fascia and we'll remove some pieces, that way we can test fit it on. On the back side of your fascia, you're going to have this absorption pad, and this needs to come off so we can gain access to this grill. You'll see these little washers that kind of bite into them. There's just a spot that those teeth will snap into, and the best way that I've found to remove these is if you have a small flathead screwdriver, if you can wedge in on one of those and just kind of peel it back, you can start to bend that, and then if you do that to the other side, you'll start to be able to kind of walk this off a little bit. And if you need to, you can always remove more, but they do come off fairly easily. So there's going to be a total of 4 of those that we're going to take off. we'll remove this pad and it will not be going back on. Now this grill, you can choose to trim it out or completely remove it. I think for a cleaner look, we're just going to take it out, but we do have these sensors that are attached to a portion of that grill, so we do need to get those removed. And then from here, it's just going to be a series of clips. So as you kind of just work your way one side to the other, just pull pressure on there, and then we can get this thing snapped out. Now, if you have a license plate that's attached to this, you are going to want to take those tabs and just slide those down for now so they're not holding on to it. Now we'll pull this out. And as I mentioned, we have our license plate still attached. We may or may not need to remove this, but as we kind of mock this up on the bumper, we can determine that. And as we mock this up, we're going to want to feed our diode bracket through this lower grill portion in the center, and then the rest of it should go into the pocket that we just opened up. Our tow hooks are also going to go in place, so just take your time here. And remember up top those clips that we peeled back. If you kind of raise up on that plastic and pop these back into place, that's a great way to hold this while you take a look at all of your alignment. And as you press this on, make sure that everything's kind of just lining up. And it looks as if we got a pretty good, on getting our base plate set up to where we won't have to do any excess trimming or going back and moving that base plate. So once you're happy with everything passed through, you cinch it up, you can start replacing everything back and getting the fascia put back on in the reverse order that we took it off. Things to obviously take in consideration are going to be all of your electrical plugs that you separated. If you had that windshield washer squirter for the front camera, just make sure everything's going back together. Now, something that I do notice is with the license plate in place, our diode plug is going to sit right here and it might have some issues opening up. So if you need to, you might notch this license plate or just find a separate place to mount this up if you have it installed. I got everything buttoned back together, and there were a few things that I see in hindsight that maybe you can do at home to save yourself a little bit of trouble, and part of that is just going to be the clearance. So I got everything to snap in, but as I went to put the bottom in and line up those lower fascia screws with the underbody panel, we were a little bit tight, and the reason being is the base plate is pretty well bumping against the plastic here. So I went on the back side and cut that out, but you can also see it's bowing here on mine. So I would maybe kind of venture to trim that out, or as they mentioned, you can go back and lower down the base plate a little bit, but a little bit of trimming is going to go a long way. Something else that I found, if you are keeping your front plate, here in Missouri we have to have front license plates, so I did have to bend these tabs down a little bit for our plug to live, and I trimmed a little bit underneath our license plate bracket just to allow for clearance. To bend those tabs down, if you just take a box end of a wrench and just kind of bend those down evenly, that'll give you enough clearance to be able to get your plug in place. But at the end of the day, this is actually a really nice looking base plate. It's all done. We got everything set up, so all that we need to do is get our vehicle set up in flat tow mode, hook up all of our components, and then hit the road. And that was a look and installation of the Roadmaster base plate on our 2024 Jeep Grand Cherokee L.